Don. Welcome to the podcast.
Nice to see you, Guy.
It's truly wonderful having you on the show. Like we were talking off air, my dear friend Lisa Tamate alerted me to your work a few weeks ago, and as soon as I checked you out, I was like, oh, this man's amazing. So I really wanted to get you on the show, and I really appreciate you joining me today.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and I love Lisa. She's an amazing human being.
She is. She certainly is. And I ask everyone on the show. I just find myself doing this every time, but it's always a good conversation starter. And that is, if we were at an intimate dinner party right now, and you sat next to a complete stranger, and they said, what do you do?" What would you say?
Gee, that's a tough one. I generally say I've developed a cutting-edge neuroscience program that works on helping people stay present and then reach their ultimate performance levels.
Wow. What would the question is put in? How would you describe neuroscience, just for the layman out there? That we hear the term a lot.
Well, a lot of it is talking about the brain and how the brain. I always talk about the brain as the computer, the body's the printer. And so if the computer's not operating right, sending error messages, it's going to affect the way the body prints. So you can have all the toner, paper, everything in the printer, but if the computer's not sending the right signals, it's going to mess up the printer.
Yeah, got you. And from that, and you talk about high performance and performance as well. I mean, your whole thing is called Inspired Performance Institute, which is amazing. What is then denying us from that performance within the body if the printer and the brain are not communicating?
There's a couple things. What I say is, if we can't stay present, then we're not going to perform at our highest level. And now what interferes with that, from my experience, has been unresolved trauma. And when we have unresolved trauma, it continues to loop and takes us out of staying present. And then the cells go into a cell danger response. And when they're in that cell danger response, it compromises the immune system, the neurotransmitters, and actually the ATP in the cell. So when we clear up that trauma, then the inflammation comes down, the immune system and neurotransmitters come back online, and then the energy is released.
Wow. There's a few things that you've triggered again. How much then is trauma, do you feel, from your experience? I mean, I'm assuming you've been doing this work a long time. Yep. And researching and looking into it. And I'd love to get into your backstory in a moment, but I'm always fascinated between the relationship with trauma and the effect on the body. Like you mentioned the keyword of inflammation. And from my background back in the health and fitness days, and from my last podcast I was telling you about earlier, inflammation was a key thing that was coming up. But I didn't really hear about it talked much about trauma actually causing these parts within ourselves on the body.
Well, what I've seen is a lot of the people that I deal with who have autoimmune issues, it's all connected back to trauma. And so what I saw was that the trauma is creating the inflammation. So for my daughter, and I know we'll probably talk about this, but she had Crohn's, and that's an autoimmune. And so what I believe was happening is the Crohn's was actually a symptom of the trauma looping. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And then do you think, what I'm always fascinated as well within the body is that if trauma is showing up as a symptom, say as Crohn's, do you think lifestyle factors and other things are also then creating a certain area of weakness that just happens to manifest in Crohn's? Or do you think that the particular trauma is then related to particular body parts? I don't know if that makes sense. I'm always curious about these things.
It depends on the individual. So my wife developed Hashimoto's, which is a thyroid issue. I see people with IBS or colitis, all those kinds of things. It just depends on the individual, but it generally shows up in some sort of a disorder.
Yeah, wow. what led you to look at this? Because you're very passionate about it. I mean, you're dedicating your life to it. You've helped so many people with it, and we can get into some of the people you've helped as well. But why trauma? Like,
Well, I led this idyllic childhood. I didn't realize that everybody wasn't living the life I had. I had amazing parents that never yelled, never screamed. They were very calm. And so what happened was when I met my wife, we were only 18. I realized she was not living in my world. She had a very dysfunctional father. And so he created fear and terror in that household. So she was constantly living in fear. And even though she was high functioning, there was nothing I could do to stop the fear. Even when she came to live in my world, she was constantly looking for danger all the time because that's how she protected herself. Now that was subconscious. She wasn't really aware she was doing it, but I could say something like, no, I don't like that. And she could tear up and start to cry. And then I would say, like, what's wrong? And she'd say, well, you're getting upset with me. And I'd say, no, I'm not. What I didn't understand at the time was that she had learned to listen very, very carefully to the way her father spoke, so she could hear when the danger was coming. So because of that, she could hear the slightest little change in my voice, and then that would activate her nervous system. And so then she would start to tear up. So I couldn't do anything to stop it. I tried changing the way I said things. I even tried to change the tone of my voice, and yet she would still get activated. And then when my daughter was 14, she was diagnosed with Crohn's. Now what we didn't know at the time is that she had had some trauma when she was around 6 years old. She didn't disclose it until she was 16. And so we looked for all kinds of resources to stop it. Changing her diet, taking out gluten, dairy, all those different things they told us to do. And yet nothing was working. She had 4 resections done where they had to go in and literally cut out pieces of her intestines because they were dying, they were atrophying. So that's when my wife said to me, you need to find an answer to this. And that started me on my research, which then led me back to trauma. And I connected the trauma to her, my wife, and other people. And that's when I started researching trauma.
that's incredible. And with your daughter's case, once you started researching, I'm guessing then you were applying your research to your daughter. And did you find the turnaround quite instantaneous once you moved the trauma, or is it a healing process that comes afterward?
It's a bit of a process, so it's hard to tell when it actually changed. But what we do know is that after she went through the program I developed, she hasn't had a Crohn's flare-up. And she had a cyst formed on her ovary. And when they went in to remove it, the doctor came in after the operation and said, I'm confused. Your chart says you have Crohn's. But when I operated, there's no evidence of any Crohn's. And she says, well, no, I haven't had any kind of a flare-up. And he says, but you're not on any medication for Crohn's. And so she says, no, I'm not taking any medications. So he says, well, I hate to tell you this, but you've never had Crohn's. And so I explained to him that she's had 4 resections done, and that when we resolved the trauma, the inflammation went down, and that's the Crohn's. And he said to me, that's impossible. If that was true, you'd have a Nobel Peace Prize. I says, then tell me what Crohn's is. And he says, Crohn's is a lifelong, debilitating disease with no known cure. And I said, I disagree. I believe Crohn's is inflammation.
And showing up, that's incredible. We actually had cases of Crohn's turn up, and I was telling you, people with cancer had it, and the same diagnosis was always the same from the medical establishment: incurable. But
incurable.
Yeah, but
yep. And I believe cancer is the same thing. The cells go into a cell danger response. So they develop a hardened membrane The purpose of that is to protect the integrity of the cell. So nothing gets into the cell, but nothing gets out of the cell. It's a temporary pause until the danger passes. But if the trauma keeps the danger active, because the memory keeps activating it, then the danger stays active and the cells never come out of the cell danger response and they die.
There you go. It's funny you say that. I've had Bruce Lipton on the show a couple of times, and he talks about the biological imperative, if I'm not mistaken, where it's the drive to survive, and that exactly what you say. No matter what you do, if you're in fight or flight, or you're in that stress response, nothing's getting in. So no matter how, I'm guessing then no matter how you eat, how you exercise, how you meditate, or the work you do, and if your nervous system and your body's in that stress place, we can feel helpless from that.
And when the body is under that stress, there's very little maintenance getting done.
Yeah.
So that's going to get the cells into a very unhealthy disease state. Because the purpose is when the danger's over, you escape from the lion, it'll start doing maintenance. But the memory keeps the lion active. So it never comes out of the cell danger response.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? When you break it down like that, it all makes sense. Now,
yeah, that's what I hear all the time. The number one thing I hear is, this makes so much sense.
And it boggles my mind that, saying that maybe not, the medical establishment don't look at this treatment. Everything's about putting out fires and maintaining.
Yeah, everything is about living, managing, and coping with it, not fixing it.
Yeah. And when you speak of trauma, Don, what kind of trauma are we looking at here? Emotional, physical, and how does that then manifest in different ways? Because you talk about your daughter having Crohn's, but can it manifest in depression, anxiety, addiction? Again, symptoms, but maybe not in a physical sense, but in how they're acting out.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is coming from memory. Humans are the only animal that stores explicit memory about events and experiences. We've stored everything we've ever experienced in our life in this memory system in great detail, especially traumatic memory. It's stored in high definition. So 95% of your mind is survival based, in the present. So what happens when it activates a memory from 5 years ago, when does it think that's happening? Right now. So it creates a physiological response, an emotion. An emotion is a call for an action. So the purpose of fear is to escape a threat. The purpose of anger is to attack a threat. So if you think about something that happened to you 5 years ago, your mind's calling for an action if you feel an emotion. Now that doesn't make sense. It's a glitch. It's an error message. That's what we fix.
Got it. And I'm always fascinated, do we need to know the trauma? Because our mental minds, our left side of the brain, tends to hang on to a lot of things so we can give it meaning. And if we got something happening that's manifesting out, like you say in these cases, do we actually need to know what the trauma is, or can we just remove whatever that glitch anyway?
We can. All we need to do is find 2 or 3 different ones that may not be one of the traumas you remember. Once the mind starts the process of updating trauma, it does all of it. So it's like an algorithm, an app that we're installing, and it'll go through and clear up pretty much everything.
That's incredible.
The mind and body are designed to heal. So if you had a broken leg and we reset your leg, we don't have to think about it healing. Everything just goes into place to start healing.
Yeah.
It's designed to do that.
So you're looking for this tipping point where you get to the root, and then there's momentum that kind of goes the other way, and then the body goes into its healing phase.
So when you go to sleep at night, your mind goes into a theta brainwave state. In theta, our mind processes everything that it learned during the day. So when I take you through the process, your mind then starts applying it. Even though we worked on 2 or 3 events, your mind then starts applying it to all those events.
Wow. And from your experience, and I want to put this to the listener, because trauma is an interesting word, because it's not attractive, and I find, I don't know about you, but I found in my own, even in the health and fitness industry, and now doing what I do, people don't like to admit they got there's something there. Like quite often we can be in our mind and go, well, I don't have trauma. Like I've had a good life, like you said, growing up. But have you found that there has been trauma, you were just unaware, and it has been playing out in a way that you weren't aware?
Yes, and that can very easily happen. So people who are high functioning, like my wife, she didn't realize that it was trauma that was affecting her. So, and if you met her, you would never have seen it. I saw it because it was behind the scenes. And she was also very protective. So she didn't want anybody to know about her childhood. And so she swore me to secrecy. And it wasn't until she went through this program that she's now open to share it. It took away all that shame and guilt and regret.
Yeah, beautiful. And those emotions as well, shame, they're big things, burdens that we carry, and it's no wonder it shows up, because we suppress them so much with our lifestyle choices and don't want to go there.
So the whole idea is those emotions are calls for an action. So if your mind is calling for an action about something that happened 10 years ago, that doesn't make sense. So we have to update that. So if somebody is actually chasing you now, it makes sense to feel fear. But if you're thinking about somebody who chased you 10 years ago and you feel fear, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
your mind's seeing it in real time.
Absolutely. Sorry that they went off camera, but that's fine. So Don, what I'm intrigued as well in then is, sorry to be hitting you left, right, and centre with these questions.
Oh no, it's great.
How far can the trauma go back?
Oh, I believe it goes all the way back into birth.
Wow.
It can go that far back into the womb.
Yeah. And there's no way we will have memories of that, I'm assuming, until we go there.
There's probably, I don't know, because most of the stuff I work on is things that most of the people can either remember, or we remember 2 or 3, and the mind will clear others.
Got it.
But the great part about this, I don't need to know what the trauma is. I've had people come to me who I know have had major trauma, and they never share one word of it. And at the same time, I can take them through this process and clear it. So it's very, very safe. So, for example, if I'm working with a woman who's been sexually assaulted, the last thing she wants to do is sit there and start talking about that in detail to a stranger. So I'm going to ask her for about a 2 to 3 minute highlight recap, and she can do it just visually. I have no idea what she's seeing. And during the process of those 2 or 3 minutes, I get the mind to update it and reset it.
Yeah. Wow. How did you come to these conclusions with this work? Because and I've been in this game long enough to know that there's things that can feel mainstream and things that can feel fringe. But for me, I find everything, when I get out of the mainstream and really start to dig and look, that's where the gold lies. And it's amazing what you've put together and now do, and how you support people.
Well, I studied a lot of different modalities, and some of the things I thought were good, some of the things weren't so good. And so I sort of took bits and pieces and then developed my own program from that, and developed some of my own techniques. And as I started testing it and going out there with people, it was amazing, the results. And now I do a 4-hour program. I don't know anybody else who's doing 4 hours. But the reason I do that is because I believe it takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours to get the mind into a restorative mindset.
Hmm.
And then it's just simple because the mind's ready to update. It's in a very alpha brainwave state where that's very, very peaceful and calm, but super focused. And then when we bring in the memory from 2 or 3 minutes, the mind's able to update it fairly quickly.
Amazing. And what happens at the end of the 4 hours? So are they aware of what's happened?
Oh yeah,
Or
they're
yeah,
participating throughout the whole thing. And so, for example, I worked with Rebecca Gregory from the Boston Marathon bombing. She was
okay.
3 feet from the first bomb, and she lost her left leg. So she'd been experiencing post-traumatic stress for 5 years, having terror nightmares every night. After we took her through the program, she had no more nightmares. And in fact, after we finished the technique, she could talk about it without shaking and crying.
Wow.
That fast.
That's amazing. I was blown away by a story I think I heard you speak about. I wonder if you could share it as well. And I think it was about a couple that were accidentally accused of a shooting. Is
Yeah.
that?
It's her name is oh my gosh, Sunny Jacobs. And Sunny and her husband were driving to North Carolina, and somebody suggested that there was somebody who needed a ride, so they shared the ride. And during the trip, Sunny and her 2 children were sleeping in the back seat, and her husband was in the front seat with this guy driving. He got pulled over by the police and was wanted. So he shot and killed the police officer. And then what happened is when the police, then he took off in the car. The police finally disabled the car by shooting at the car. And then when they got out, they thought, okay, we're safe, but they blamed all of them. And they actually all went to prison for murdering a police officer. And so her husband was actually executed on death row. And 2 years later, Sunny was exonerated because they realized she didn't do it. And so she ended up meeting another man who had also been accused of policing officer in Ireland, and they fell in love, and now she lives in Ireland with him, and she works with a lot of people who get exonerated, and then they come over and spend some time with her, and she talks to them about it and counsels them on it. But she went through our program, and she said this is the only thing that stopped the looping of the trauma.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean,
Yeah,
what she would have felt to go
17
through that.
years on death row. And they've done plays about her life. Susan Sarandon, Marlo Thomas, Kate Capshaw have all played her in these plays.
Wow.
Great story.
And when somebody goes through your program and overcomes it, because I heard a great quote once, and that's the memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom. And is that what is kind of happening, that you're able to look back upon you? I'm assuming you still have the memories. It's not like they wiped from you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens is, and this is why I explain so much about the science, the only reason you have an emotion is because your mind wants you to do something. When we update that memory, you just see the information, but your mind's not calling for an action because the action would be designed to protect you. But there's nothing to be protected from. So it's just information.
Wow.
Doesn't that make
And
sense?
yeah, totally. Absolutely. So what about people with, say, like depression's a common one?
That's a really good question. What I say to people when they come in with depression is I say, can you tell me what you're angry about? And most of them will say, well, I'm not angry, I'm depressed. And I say, right. Depression is the absence of an emotion. Your mind has been calling for an action over and over. Because you didn't take the action, your mind protects you and shuts down. Once we get to the source of what the anger was and we resolve it, the depression lifts.
Amazing.
It's a protection.
So if you know if somebody doesn't express much emotion and keeps themselves closed off, and it could be labeled in depression, that's normally something, there's normally a deep anger. Is that what you found that's residing underneath, or something that's a trauma that's happened, they've shut down and they disassociate from themselves?
Yeah, because the mind's been saying, stop it from happening, do something about it. So say you took a child who was physically or emotionally abused. As they kept thinking about it, their mind would be saying, stand up for yourself, do something, say something. Now, if that's going on for years and years since you were a child, and you never did because you couldn't, the mind shuts down to protect you. And I always talk about when people say, I sabotage myself, I say that's impossible. The brain cannot sabotage itself. It's designed for survival. So it will do whatever it can take to live, not die. And so if it can work around a problem, it's seen a potential pain and it wants to avoid the pain. So say, for example, somebody had experienced maybe a father who was very successful, and yet he was an alcoholic, or maybe he was abusive. And now this person starts to become successful. Their mind has associated the father and that pain with success. And all of a sudden now what looks like sabotage, but it's actually protection from running into the same pain.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm guessing then, especially because I know you've worked with all kinds of people, to high achievers, to people with trauma. Well, not saying that big traumatic experiences, I say, because we all have trauma. But
Yeah.
when you shift that trauma, are you seeing then, like, and I'm just going to go slightly woo-woo here, because I found myself, as I've worked on myself over the years, I find the way I'm being from a moment to moment basis, I just feel more at peace with myself, more joy, and I appreciate the moments more, and I'm not striving so much to fulfill an internal need, if that makes sense. Then as I've come more from that place, my life has worked out more beautifully and randomly in more ways than I could ever predict. Would you say that's a fair comment in what you're finding? If there's something shifted or moves, things start to open up for people, or what have you witnessed, or how would you frame that?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I have experienced is that people will say things look brighter, the grass looks greener, the sky looks bluer. And the way I explain it is that if your mind is using energy to fix things that don't exist, you don't have 100% of your energy available. When we free up all that energy, everything just seems to work easier. Everything looks brighter, feels lighter, and it's because now you have more power, more energy. So also health improves. And I asked somebody, based on what I've explained and how your mind keeps using energy to fix something that doesn't exist, how much do you lose? And people will say 60, 70, 70. And I say, so imagine what happens when we free up that energy. Now your maintenance is going to get taken care of. Your health will improve. You'll feel better. You've just got more power for focus, and that's why I called it a performance program. It's not trauma therapy, because I start from the premise that there's nothing wrong with anybody. There's nothing wrong with anybody's mind. Everybody's mind is being affected by events and experiences, and that's stopping us from staying present.
Amazing. I'm keen to touch on as well, if you don't mind, on your son, because I know he had a head injury and that being a form of physical trauma. And I'm already curious to know what you discovered along with that, because I come from a rugby background. I used to play rugby union a long time ago now. I haven't played in over 20 years, but I still listen to rugby podcasts, and head injuries and trauma is a big talking point in the game right now back home in the UK. And I'm from Wales, which is, I don't know if you know, but rugby's our religion.
Oh, yeah. It's like I'm from Canada. It's like hockey.
Hockey, right. Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious to know, like, if this leads into that, or what you found out with your son as well, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Yeah, he had 3 head injuries. One in elementary school, one in middle school, one in high school. And each one progressively, he started to see more signs of problems. And by the time he was in high school, they were trying to diagnose him as having major depression. And I said, no, I believe he has TBI, traumatic brain injury. But I could not get them to agree with me. They would not do the scans that I wanted. I wanted to do a SPECT scan so we could see blood flow. And so they just wanted to do an MRI, and they said the MRI looks fine. But it wasn't the MRI I needed. I needed either a functional MRI or a SPECT scan to show the blood flow, because that's what I believe was happening. He wasn't getting enough blood flow to certain parts of the brain, in particular to his frontal lobe, which is what you need for your executive functioning. So it would appear like depression, but it wasn't depression. He just couldn't get enough power to do what we do and take for granted. So he would just want to lie down and sleep. He didn't want to do anything. He lost interest in everything. And of course he would, because he didn't have the power to do what he was trying to do. That would be very, very disturbing. And so they just wanted to medicate him. And I said no. And so we eventually ended up having to take him to a specialist who was able to do a SPECT scan for me, and also did a hyperbaric dive, and then did another SPECT scan. And we showed more blood flow starting to move. And so ever since we got him into hyperbaric oxygen therapy, he lit up. Because now he has enough power, enough oxygen to the parts of the brain that had been damaged from the head injuries. And I'm sure playing rugby, and I played hockey, right? I had 6 concussions that I know of. But I never had the problems he had. So why? Who knows? The Dr. Harsh that we went to see, he just said you have a bigger reserve. He just didn't have that same reserve.
Yeah, wow. So you, with the hyperbaric oxygen chambers, how many sessions do you think it would take to start to see results? Because I know we've spoken about Lisa often on air, and when I heard her story with her mum and then putting her through the hyperbaric, it just blew me away. Like, it, you know, it's
so at least 20, and a 40 would be great, but the more you do, the better it is. And the problem we even have with our son is he feels better. So we keep saying, keep going. And he's like, but I'm okay. He doesn't want to do more. But I know he would continue to improve if we could get him to do more.
wow. I'd like to trial that. Like, give myself a, what would you say, one a week would be?
No, you want to do them close together. Because it's a cumulative thing. So if you only do once, it pushes in so much, and then you got to push a little more the next time and next time, so it'll start to move back. So you want to do them as close as possible.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. And have you put yourself through it?
Oh yeah, I've sat in them.
Yeah.
Yep. But I didn't have the problems he had. But even it helps everybody. It's one of the best kept secrets in medicine. And Lisa will tell you all about that, how it changed her mother's life.
Yeah, well, we got a full podcast on it, if so people can scroll back, you know. Yeah, it's just fascinating. So just loop it all the way back around. Somebody's had a 4-hour session with you. They've gone through, they've removed it. And I know you speak about the theta, because obviously sleep is so important anyway, but a lot of healing goes on. So we fall asleep and then we're going into that unconscious theta state while sleeping. And that's when we're auto-correcting ourselves.
Well, the mind's doing a lot of processing in theta. When
Right.
you go below 4 hertz or cycles per second, you go into delta. And delta is where most of the maintenance gets done. Because that's
Okay.
when it's dreamless sleep. So
Yeah.
the mind is now just focused on maintenance. In theta, it's processing what you've experienced. And that's why I find people who have trauma have trouble sleeping. Because the mind's continuing trying to process it. But it can't process it because it's not happening. It's just
Yeah.
information.
Okay. And then do do we need then, after the session and moving forward, is it easy to slip back in that, or have you found that it's auto corrected, and are there practices we need to enforce just to ensure the work we've just done is then supported? Like,
Well, what we
what
do
happens?
after the 4-hour session is I give you 30 days of audios.
Right.
Because humans have 2 memory systems. We have explicit memory, the details about events. No other animal has that, just humans. And then we have procedural memory, and that's associative. So we learn through association and repetition. So we develop habits and behaviors. So we also want to start updating those old habits and behaviors. And we do that by listening to the audios. But it's easier to do that now because you don't have memory activating the nervous system. So now
Got
we
it.
can make the changes we want.
Yeah. And a lot of these questions are quite selfish because I'm just coming up from my
That's
own
great, though. I
curiosity,
love
but I'm aware of the listener as well. What group environments? Because we hold retreats here in Australia, and I work with a therapist and also somebody that works with sound. And what we've found over 3 or 4 days is that when you put people in a group, there's a synergy about groups that is just. And I talk about it on the show, or on the science of the quantum field, whatever you want to label it, I don't know, but there's something magical that happens as well. Have you done this in group environments yourself, and have you
Yeah,
noticed a difference?
I have. I started with a group of 5, and then I went to 10, and then I did 40, and the biggest one
Oh,
I've done is 140.
oh,
And you're right. It's a huge energy in that room. And what I do is I bring one person up, and I'll do a session, like a quick update for them. And when you watch somebody heal in a room, and all these people are seeing it, it's amazing. And then I then show all of them. I take them through the same technique. So I show them a technique, demonstrate, and then take them all through it. But they got to watch the person literally transform in front of them, and it's very
right.
powerful.
Wow. And that, because it gets me thinking, because obviously with something, this work is so important, and especially with the pandemic and things that have been going on, there's a lot of people that need support with this kind of stuff, and obviously big groups to be able to take people through would be phenomenal.
So I
Um,
have it online as well, an online program that people
okay,
can go through, or we can do the groups, or they can do one-on-one with me. And
amazing.
all of them work very well.
Yeah, amazing. And do you find that people need to be open and ready to do this
That always
work?
helps because it makes my job easier.
Yeah.
But I've had people come in saying, I'm very skeptical. I don't really believe this is going to help me. But I said, you don't need to believe in science for science to work. I'm going to take you through the process. Your brain does all the work. I'm just taking it through a process. And so you can believe whatever you want, but the brain understands the communication of the program.
Yeah. Oh,
So, like I said, I had a guy come in who literally was just did it to keep somebody else happy, who kept telling him he had crashed his plane with his 9-year-old daughter into a lake. And so he did not want to go through our program.
Wow.
He finally got convinced to come, and he did it just to get the person to stop asking him. And then after the session, he called this person up and said, that was the single greatest life-changing experience I've ever had. And he did not want to come.
There you go. Amazing.
Yep.
Do you ever how does it make you feel that the impact you're having on another person and the ripple effect that's going on into
It's
the world?
incredible. It really is, to watch people and see them change, see their lives change. You know, I worked with a lady who was in her 60s, got a home invasion, was pistol whipped, and was suffering with post-traumatic stress. The therapist who sent her to me, she called me after the session to say that this lady came back in to see her. And she said, and she was walking with a walker. And she came in to see the therapist and says, I have good news and bad news. And she says, well, the good news is, looks like you're not walking with your walker. She goes, right, I don't need my walker. She goes, the bad news is you're fired. I don't need to come back, because we healed her. And she would have been in therapy for years with that, teaching her to live and manage and cope with it. Now, I'm not against therapy. Where I think therapy is very beneficial is dealing with day-to-day life stresses. You know, a job, a relationship, things like that. What it's not very good at is trauma, because it continues to reinforce the trauma by talking about it.
Do you think this will become conventional wisdom in helping people heal?
I do. I think it's just so cutting edge right now, and it goes against what they've all been trained. The advantage for me, I came into it not wanting to learn what they did to practice it. I wanted to learn it to get my degree, but I wanted to come up with something better. So I came in right from the start trying to say there's got to be a better way.
Wow. There you go. No, that's amazing. That's amazing. I'm just aware of the time on the show, and I ask everyone a set of questions just to get to know you a little bit better. And I will ask you this one, but I'm not sure what it would be, because you had such an idyllic upbringing, which sounds amazing.
It was.
But has there been a low point in your life that has later, when you look back upon it, has been a blessing?
Yeah, because I've always been a business person, and so I've always looked for different ways to succeed in life. And I've had my failures. I had a major lawsuit with a big international corporation that tried to rip me off and steal my idea. And it went through a 3-4 year lawsuit. That was a low point in my life, because I'm a very positive person. And dealing with that lawsuit was constant negativity. And that was very hard for me to live with. Until we got to the point where my wife says, you got to drop this. You got to get out of this. It's killing you. And it was.
Yeah.
But I think because as a child, I had learned to regulate my nervous system, I was able to handle that better. I could separate the times when I needed to be involved with it, and then the times when I was away from it. But just being in it is what was very, very disturbing for me. Because my lawyers would take me through the process, and practice depositions and all that kind of stuff, and just beat me up and say, this is what you got to be prepared for. And I found that very negative.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's interesting that you just triggered another question, but where you talk about your upbringing and you're in this very safe environment, and I guess your nervous system wasn't on red alert all the time, have you found from your work then, so depending upon how we were brought up and raised culturally, with guardians or whatever it might be, that we tend to, or if we move the trauma, that we tend to handle situations, those precious situations, much better, because the way our nervous system is able to self-regulate better, because it doesn't have the glitches?
That's actually what the whole program is for. So now when new things come at you, you don't have the old stuff that is then aggravating the nervous system. So you're able to handle what's happening now without this old data coming in,
Yeah.
which just exasperates it.
Yeah. And then hence we don't have the triggers those little things that we like you said, why is my wife crying right now? Or what that, just from the tone of my voice, or it could be anything that could be setting it off and we're not even aware, but they're
Yeah.
gone.
And like I said, as a child, I got bumped every once in a while, somebody at school or a teacher saying something. But when I came home, my whole nervous system would get regulated because I was in a safe place. And so my nervous system was being trained to do that. So if I had that early in life, when I came later in life, I just knew how to do it. Where a lot of people don't have that training early in life. They're living in a lot of trauma. And so then when they come into more trauma as an adult, it's just cumulative. And then it really becomes a source of distress for them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, fair enough. Do you have a morning routine, or do you have any practices or anything that you implement in your life to kind of give yourself a bit of a maintenance? Or do you find that once you've worked on yourself, you can just happily go about your life?
I don't have a particular routine. I do different things all the time. And so I like to, first thing I get up in the morning, I'll generally check the computer, I'll check my emails. I don't do anything too much. I like to read and then sort of get into my work. But once I start my work, I want to continue. So sometimes my wife will say, she'll come in and say, well, let's go for a walk. And I'll go, oh, I'm already in. You had to get me before I started because I want to keep going.
Yeah, fair enough. If you were to gift a book to someone, what book do you think it would be?
I think the first one talks about the program and how I developed it. You Must Be Out of Your Mind.
Yeah.
I think it's a great book because it shares a lot of the program and stories. I think people get a lot out of that. The second book was called Emotional Concussions, and I developed that because a lot of people said, I don't have that big T trauma, but what they had was these bumps. A mean teacher, a mean coach, somebody who said something and then that affected them. Those are emotional concussions. And so I coined that term, emotional concussions, and then wrote the book.
Yeah, beautiful. And last question I ask everyone on the show to leave is, with everything we've covered today, is there anything you'd like to leave the listeners to ponder on?
Yeah, I think it's what I say right from the very first thing when somebody comes to see me. There's nothing wrong with anybody, and there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your mind. If I lived your life exactly the way you lived yours, I couldn't have done things any differently than you've done. I just led a different life, but that life gave me the tools to help you.
Beautiful. And if they want to find out more, where's the best place to send them? I'll put links in the show notes anyway. But,
so I think we have www.gettip.com, and then I think we're doing / isn't it Guy or on the show? What are we doing?
Not sure. Haven't been told, but
it should be. It's probably be in the notes. But
okay.
Even if you go to gettip.com, that's where you'll find the information.
Yeah, beautiful. And we'll link below anyway. That's fine. And I have no doubt people will come and check you out, Don. It's a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for sharing. I truly find it all fascinating. And
I enjoyed it. You're going to have to come over there and do a big group session.
Yeah, absolutely. Once the world opens up a bit. Have you been to Australia, Don?
I've never been. I'd love to.
It's a magical
beautiful
place.
Country.
Yeah, I have no doubt. Won't be much ice hockey, but there'll certainly be surf and good weather for you. That's for sure.
But you rugby players are like us hockey players, tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I did think I was tough once upon a time. I'm not so sure now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but look, thank you for all you do. Thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom today. I really appreciate it, and I have no
really
doubt
enjoyed it.
Everyone will get a lot out of it. Thank you, Don.
All right, thanks, guys. Take care.